start.
Okay.
And welcome. Thank you so much for making time to be here. We're very appreciative of it. And just as a start, I want to welcome you. And if you can, give us a brief introduction to Help of Ojai, the history of the organization, and your general purview, what you do.
So Help of Ojai was founded in the late 1960s by groups of, I think some of them were church groups, but just friends, members of the public who wanted to work together to support their neighbors in need. That was the late 60s. We incorporated in 1974, so we applied for our 501c3 status and were approved in 1974, so we're literally about to be at our 50-year anniversary, which is really huge, and we're really proud of that. The focus of our org is meeting the basic needs of Ojai Valley residents. So over time, that has looked like transportation, so door-to-door transportation of folks who are over 60, who are either disabled, maybe they're in a wheelchair or have a walker. We take them to the destination of choice within the Ojai Valley, our senior nutrition program, so food in general, so that is both what we prepare and serve through our senior nutrition program for aging adults, some of whom are homebound, as well as what exists within our community assistance program, which is all of our low-income services, so our food pantry, helping people apply for utility assistance, housing support, which I can kind of go more into detail of what that looks like now. But the transportation program was one of our very first founding programs. They drove around in like a big van, essentially. So that's been around for quite a while. But again, the basic need of the Ojai Valley, also knowing that that changes. So I came around to the organization in 2017 as a nonprofit management graduate intern. So I began my time there in 2017 and was hired to do case management, which I did for several years before I transitioned into my role now of co-executive director. I worked, and I think this is a really good example, probably like 6 months after I started working for Help was the Thomas Fire. So I led our entire recovery effort, which went on for a few years. I did disaster case management. We managed a budget of close to $700,000 through that program that all went back out directly to people who were affected by the Thomas Fire.
Wow.
So that was not something that obviously our org, when it was founded in the 60s, probably ever thought they would do. And that's a great example of how we, as an organization, and what's also, I think, so great about Help of Ojai is that we can pivot because we know the community, we work really closely with those who need our assistance, but when something like this happens, we can figure out how we are able to address it.
Oh, that's really nice.
And COVID's a great example, and I'll kick it to Megan because she's the
Can I ask a question before you?
Yeah.
So has the need changed over the years? You said you address the needs as they are, but have they?
I think like the fundamental haven't, right? Like you're still addressing people who are maybe living in poverty or all potentially on the cusp, right? Like I think for us, we work with a lot of people who, if they didn't have access to our food pantry, wouldn't be able to pay their rent.
More
right?
now than previously?
Like 10 years ago or in...
Yeah, 10 years ago.
I'd say more this year, probably, than within the last 10 years.
Okay.
We're seeing that trend, absolutely. Yeah,
In terms
we have
of
seen food programming skyrocket. There's programming that and I was going to wait till we talked more about COVID, but like we have programming that has closed, right? We had an adult daycare that closed during COVID, mostly due to low enrollment. I mean, COVID was kind of the factor that was like, this would be very difficult for us to reopen just due to COVID restrictions. But enrollment sort of got smaller and smaller and smaller. But that doesn't mean there's not a need. We had we weren't the high, like super high skill, it was an adult daycare, so the people who were coming still had to be able to care for themselves, et cetera. And what I think happened is more of those people became much higher need.
What about housing need over the last 10 years?
That's what I thought you were asking is, are you seeing more people are needing food or housing assistance?
Correct.
Transportation, same?
I would say that because Ojai in general is an older population.
Yeah.
We consistently see new people coming into our transportation and our senior nutrition and our activities programs. Because as we see people leave the program, either because they have gone to assisted living or live with other family members or can't use the program anymore, we see new people coming in. So there's always this constant flow.
But housing in particular?
Housing's huge.
But is it worse now?
Yes.
Yes.
Than it
it's
was
100%.
10 years ago?
100%.
And why is it worse? Is it because there are more people here that need housing, or is it because there's less housing, or what?
It's too expensive.
Yes.
It's gotten too
So
expensive.
people are getting priced out.
Uh-huh.
The rate in which housing has increased, right? So rentals, for example, is not matched by what we're paying living wages
Got
in
it.
this area.
Got it.
Right,
That's
so
it.
you have this really interesting town, right, of, as Megan said, Ojai is one of the it is the oldest city, like per capita, right? Like our percentage of adults over the age of 65, it's the highest percentage of any city in Ventura County. So we are an old city. And with that, you have folks who are on fixed incomes. They are not able to go get a second job and work more to be able to pay their rent.
Yeah.
Their landlord suddenly can get a whole lot more money for their rental,
Yes.
and therefore they're being asked to leave. And so that's this whole other, big...
I was just going to say, I looked on Zillow this morning.
Oh,
There was
God.
like 33 rentals. None of them were below 3,500.
Right.
Many were
Right.
like 6, 7,
Yep.
8, 9,000
yeah.
a month. So let me just make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. So if we look at income that people would be getting in the valley, they're nowhere near matching the cost
No.
of rentals, even for apartments
No.
or ADUs and things like that.
Well, there aren't any ADUs in my we don't our clients don't rent ADUs, I guess is what I'll say. The population I've worked with historically aren't in ADUs in the back of someone's property, right?
And the reason for that is what?
I don't think there are any. I mean, you might know truly like what the city says there are in terms of numbers of ADUs, but my understanding is like we're not sitting down with folks who are like, please help me fill out this application for an ADU.
Okay.
Which is how we know things, right? Like we know because we're case managers, and so we have pretty involved relationships with our community
Right.
at Help of Ojai, and so we know these things or we hear these things.
Well, I think you were
Yeah.
going to get to this maybe. How does somebody become a client of yours? They walk in, what happens?
So they can become a client in many ways. So
Okay.
they can access our food pantry. That's one way to become a client. They can walk in and say, I need help. And so we'll send them to a case manager. Or if it's someone who calls and asks, what are our senior activities, then they become, a client that way. So anytime somebody signs up for one of our services, then they become some type of client of ours.
Okay.
Or like home delivered meals is often a referral from a hospital.
Right.
Or
a
some family member.
Calling.
And that's a big, that's a pretty strong,
Who's partnering with you then? Like you said, a hospital might call on you.
Yeah.
But who else? Or what other organizations?
So with our home delivered meals and our congregate program, that is a partnership or a grant from the Ventura County Area Agency on Aging. So we apply every year. We're the only people that do this in Ojai, so it's not a competitive thing. So they're our partner in that program. They also give us referrals. So if somebody calls them and says, I live in Ojai, I need food services, then they'll say, okay, call Help of Ojai.
So your funding is through various grants? Or how are you funded?
we are funded, depending on the year, anywhere from like 30 to 50% by community contribution. Often, when it's on the higher end, so like the 21-22 fiscal year, it was almost 50% because we had a really large bequest that was left to us. So that was, a little bit of an anomaly, but not too much, or like not that unusual. We hover around like 30 to 40% government grant. So government and foundation.
Federal, State? State,
Yeah.
county?
I was trying to think if the state had
It kind
anything,
of-
had, like,
Yeah, there is a little bit, like a lot of the money is federally allocated to the states, and then the states decide like how they're going to
Right.
spend that money. So the California Department of Aging is where we get our money for the senior nutrition program, but some of that money comes from the federal government putting it down.
So about half from government grants and the other half,
no, government grants are like probably 20%,
Okay.
if even. So because we clump, like when you look at our P&L or if you look at our financials, it for us when we put it together is like government and foundation, right? So we get foundation grants that are larger than, for example, what the city of Ojai gives us, right?
what kind of foundations?
Smith Hobson, like what specifically, or like
No,
what?
Just in general?
It's a lot focused on aging population.
Uh-huh.
Like that's mostly what I would say, or yeah, mostly aging, right? That when I think about what we apply for.
So California-based foundations?
Smith Hobson does a lot of local giving.
Right.
But then you also get, what, you get something from the city sometime, you have gotten some years.
No.
No.
So
No.
from the
So
city.
let's clarify what the
Yeah.
city does. No, yeah, this
Right.
is important. 'cause
So-
it's-
Sure.
What the city of Ojai provides is $4,000 a month for our transportation program. Because they have the trolley system, they are required by law to have a paratransit option. So that is what we do for them.
Okay.
So they pay us $4,000 a month for that, and then they are reimbursed $2,000, so they are reimbursed 50% of that, and that has been going on for years. I
Okay.
haven't been able to find the
forever.
official.
I mean, it's been.
So you guys didn't get any of the
No.
nonprofit money that they gave
No.
last year? Okay, all right.
Is your budget public?
Yes.
So you mind talking about it?
Sure. I mean, yeah, we can
It's on-
talk about
it's on
it.
the website
Well, I
right
think it
there.
depends on what, like
Right.
what are our like how much money.
Yeah, I'm just curious to know, I mean, it's a
absolutely.
piece of, to understand the thing.
I just
how-
might not be able to sit here and tell you it was like 1.5 mil, like, the super specific details,
Yeah.
but we can
That's roughly
absolutely.
the budget though that we
Yeah.
looked at. It's during the COVID time, it
Yeah.
was more because
Yes.
you've gotten much
Great
more
plates.
money.
Yeah.
But now $1.5 million-ish.
So we're auditing, we're going through our audit right now for our 22-23 fiscal year. So it's not, like nothing's final yet, but we're looking at probably that end of year was close to 1.4.
Okay.
That's what we sort of ended the year with. And so like the major pieces of revenue for us, one, we have a thrift store. So that's huge for us. We run Second Helpings thrift store, and that all of that merchandise comes from the community who donates things to us. So we have our little store on the East End, which we love, and that's, again, depending on the year, what we're looking at this year, it'll be close to like 20% of our
That's
so it's
amazing.
huge.
That's
Yeah, so like
amazing.
we're hoping, and the thrift store is so important and special, I think, to this community for a lot of reasons,
No,
but
it's
it's really important for us because it does generate revenue for us. But of course, we do have a staff member who works there and staff her at the donation center. So we have the donation center. We have our government and foundation grants, which I think I just pulled this was like what, not even 30%, like 25% this last year.
Yes.
Our like what's huge for us are community contributions.
And when you say community, that
Like-
means individuals primarily.
Not any foundation, so
Okay.
not even like a local foundation, but just truly we do 2 direct asks every year. That is our level of fundraising.
Yeah.
Direct mail. And that generates around like 200,000 for us on a really good year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's huge for us. I mean, that's so those 2 things, but then we have things like we ask for, donations for our home delivered meals or certain programming, et cetera. And so we, lump, that's all, community
And then,
contribution
yeah,
too.
That's helpful. The Women's Fund and Rotary,
Yeah.
places like that, small grants, smallish grants.
Well, small, but really, actually, no.
Like
I mean,
yeah.
it's not. That's actually big for us.
That's
I mean,
about what
Yes.
we get for any foundation grant coming in is between $5,000 and $15,000.
Yeah, okay.
So,
And we received last year, for the first time, $10,000 from the Ojai Women's Fund to sponsor our inclement weather grant or inclement weather shelter grant. And then we were awarded this year as well, $15,000.
Right, okay.
So we're hugely
That's wonderful.
happy about that. Like, that's a really big deal.
Very.
And I will say that it's really important to us to receive, like, to get things from Rotary, right? Or to be awarded or receive from, like, a Rotary or the Women's Fund. It's so nice because we're the only org doing what we do here. Like, we are one of the only, if not the only, who solely serve Ojai Valley, right? Like, we have these very specific parameters in terms of, like, geographically who we can support. And so it is this really nice, like, local community giving to a org like us. It's just really...
I'm surprised. I would have thought it would take more than that to do what you've described that you're doing.
Well, it probably does, and it's why we're all crazy and overworked, right? I mean, it's true. It's one of the, I mean, we're super small.
Yep.
Like, we are a very small staff.
Just how many employees and how many clients are you
So
serving?
Megan and I were doing this yesterday.
We have 8 full-time
Yeah.
employees
Okay.
and 6 part-time employees and between 150 and 200 volunteers that we work with throughout the year.
And then clients, I mean, I would say it's thousands. Like, I would say that we touch probably thousands of people in the Ojai Valley every year.
It's
Yes.
thousands, 10,000, 5,000, 20,000.
I would say between,
Great question.
Yeah, between all programs,
Probably.
like 3,000 to 5,000.
I was going to say more than 5, less
Yeah.
than 10.
Okay.
It's hard because, like, so we know, for example, our food pantry, right?
Okay.
We know when you come, you've told us that you live with so-and-so, right? And so we know, like, you're the one person in your household and you have one roommate, right? Well, you're not sharing with us that also so-and-so's maybe living with you part-time that you're also taking care of, or you maybe haven't disclosed that. Or knowing that these people's households are shifting, the size often changes. So when one person representing a household comes, that total number often fluctuates.
Sure, of course. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
So it's I would say the food pantry is where we absolutely are. You know, that's why those numbers are so high, if you will.
So that's a good number.
Yeah.
How many meals are being made every day?
For our home delivered meals, we have 80 meals that go out every day.
Okay.
And between 10 to 20 people come in for our congregate meal program.
Okay.
And you said 100 or more volunteers? Mm-hmm. How did you manage that?
Well, that's how we were founded,
Yeah,
right? I
it's
mean,
all volunteer.
that is what I'll say, and that's low for us.
It's impressive.
We saw a very big dip during COVID, right? Because most of our volunteers are retired, and so they either didn't feel safe, volunteering during that time, and then, or they themselves just felt like this is the time for me to break from this, if you will. And so we did see that number drop a lot. Like, prior to that, it was like probably 500 a year.
Okay.
Wow.
Because just senior nutrition in one
Right.
day for senior nutrition to function, it's 2 staff members and then probably 5, 6, 7, like 10 volunteers.
10 volunteers, because we have people come in,
Yeah.
we have 5 routes that need to be driven. We have people that have to make the salads. We have people that help serve the food. So
Yeah.
it's, one program can take 10 volunteers a day, and then you multiply that by 5 days a week, and that's already 50 right there just for one.
Did you buy the building that you're in?
Montgomery Street.
You bought it?
Montgomery
Yeah, oh yeah, we
Street.
bought it.
You bought it?
Cafe Emporium.
Yeah.
You didn't hear, Tom? No, I'm just kidding. It was a
Well,
big deal.
I heard that you
I'm just
moved
kidding.
in there,
Yeah,
and I was
we-
very impressed that you could do that,
Well,
because I
us
would have,
too.
I would have
Let's-
thought that's a primo.
Let's expand the question.
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
say,
So you wanna
let's
hear
talk
that
about
history?
Your locations.
Sure,
No, in other
sure,
words,
okay.
What are all the properties that you operate out of
Okay.
or own? Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned the thrift store.
Yes.
You know where that is over there? Yeah.
So we have Montgomery Street, which we were able to buy due to a bequest that came in. Someone left us a house in the Arbolada. It was Irene Koch, I can say that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Irene Koch bequest allowed us to buy Montgomery Street. So that's where we function and do a lot of our administrative, our food pantries there. And then we have West Campus, so 370 Baldwin Road.
The old Honor Farm.
The old Honor Farm, yes. So that has our senior nutrition program, functions out of there, out of the kitchen, and then our donation center is there.
That's where people bring items
Yes.
to go to the thrift store.
So we don't own Montgomery Street outright, right? Like we pay a mortgage on that building.
Right.
So it wasn't
Yeah.
like we had
But you're the owner.
1 million in cash that we said, you know, like we're here to do that, right?
Yeah.
And I think that was something that was really interesting, like later on, that a lot of people asked about, right? And it's like, yeah, we also though, prior to that, moving into Montgomery Street, we were in 4 different locations. We were at the thrift store, we were at 108 Fox Street, we were at City Hall,
And
at
you had
Little
rent
House.
in all those places.
We owned Fox Street.
Oh, you did?
Okay, so we owned that outright, right? And like the story goes, you know, I haven't lived in Ojai long enough to have witnessed all of this. So that was the old thrift store until 2010 when we took over the building on East Ojai. So that building, that Fox Street building, that's where I worked out of, and also Megan when she started with the org. We all did our time in that building, and we sold that, right? So whenever we were ready to move and put everyone in one spot, essentially, we sold Fox Street. So we did own that one, and so that also was part of why we were able to buy another building.
Right.
But it was urgent, right? Like Fox Street was not meeting the need of the org anymore in terms of what the community assistance program was doing. We were not authorized to move that program into Little House, which is behind City Hall. And so at that time, we realized, like, we've got to figure this out.
Yeah.
And this was when Megan and I, we weren't directors yet. This was when we knew the previous executive director, Terry Wolf, was retiring. So we were a part of these conversations, obviously, but we weren't, you know, steadfast in the process, if you will. But so it was a really big deal because I think we were in Little House for like since the 80s,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it was a
It was a
long
really
time.
long time,
We had
yeah.
Oak Tree House there that the org built. You know, Kent Hall was a lot of what we did, you know, is why it is the way it is now. But we like couldn't be happier with Montgomery Street. I mean,
That's
it's
really great.
amazing. And I say this from the perspective of being that staff that was sort of in a satellite location on Fox Street. For me as the director that oversees CAP, to be able to just like walk across the building to see staff and also to see clients and to see what's just happening is wonderful. It has done so much, and I think it's done so much for our staff and for more than anything our community, because now they're able to access a senior activity and the food pantry or do whatever, you know, utility assistance application. All of this is at one spot now. And I think that, like,
Well, to have you be in the middle of town is great.
Right.
which is so funny. We moved a block away, right? And everyone
No,
is
but
like, no, but it's so
onto Main
true.
Street.
No, you're absolutely, you're absolutely right. But it's just so funny because, you know, there was a lot, like there was pushback.
Let me ask, you just mentioned it, but this co-director model
Yeah.
is unusual. So how did that come about and
Sure.
how does it work?
Okay,
Or how do you work together?
Yeah. Megan and I do not manage each other. Our board of directors manages us, and we manage respective programming. So I oversee the community assistance program, the thrift store, so like all the second helpings, the thrift store, the donation center, and then West Campus, which we didn't really go specifically into, but that is more than just our business there, right?
The Land Conservancy's there.
Yep.
Our
The
rentals,
Raptor Center,
right?
yeah,
So that
through
rental
all
property,
of them.
right? Like I oversee that part of our business.
You guys own that and they're renting from
No.
you? Oh, no.
We don't own it.
You are renters.
We hold a master lease of 35 years from the county of Ventura.
Okay.
So they are the owners.
Understood.
We signed a CUP and a lease, or we, you know, wrote a CUP and signed a lease in 2007.
Okay.
So for 35 years. Yes. And so they are all our tenants.
Okay.
And then
Got it.
Megan.
And then from your perspective, yeah.
So I oversee the senior programming. So I oversee our transportation program, our activities program, and yeah, that is probably our biggest program, is our senior nutrition program. And I think the co-directorship came about because we do so much, and I think a lot of people didn't realize that the community assistance program was a part of Help of Ojai. And it's a huge part of us. And so to be able to manage and expand and have these programs really be able to meet the needs, they needed more management. So being able to divide the programs and focus on those, but then also have someone to collaborate with to say, hey, this is going on, how do we do this? Or, can you write the annual appeal? I'll write the membership appeal. So it's just being able to have someone to collaborate, because it is a lot going on all the time. And I don't think that people realize that with such a small staff, how much that can be to take on, writing all the grants, managing all the programs, and trying to get everything done.
And that's what I was gonna say. Like, we don't have a director of development. Like, we don't have anyone who does development for us or grant writing. That's Megan and I. Like, we're doing all of that. Like, we do all the fundraising, we do all the budgeting, all the minor details, etc. That's us, right? And then underneath us are our direct program managers.
Yes.
But your board, I hope, is supporting you as well.
No, and I think, and I do think that this model was unique to them too. Of course, we weren't a part of the conversations, right, before it was happening, but I think that especially during COVID, which maybe this is you going back to kind of your involvement with the org, because I feel like COVID is what really set it up for us to take on the co-director model.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak for you.
The
but.
board comes from, how do people get on the board?
Nomination. So people nominate themselves, and if people know, I think this is a good board member, we look at our volunteers, and we send out the all-call every year to see who wants to run, and then it's a membership vote. So anybody that is a member of the organization by volunteering, donating, or being a client, they can vote for our board members.
Okay, so it's not, the board doesn't decide who the board members will be, the membership decides. That's different.
Yes.
Now, the membership is who?
Anybody who donates, volunteers, or is a client of ours.
Receive services, which is cool, and that was that's in our bylaws, right? That's what was written way back in the 70s.
Nice model.
I know, it's very interesting.
It is interesting, but we do have. I mean, our board is great, and I think we have some really wonderful people, because it's not we're, as you know so far, right? We do a lot and we touch a lot of really different areas of need, and some of them people have really strong opinions about, right? And not necessarily against us or whatever, right? But I think especially if we talk more about the unhoused population and what's happening in Ojai, but there was extreme pushback for us moving into 108 Montgomery.
Because it was too prominent?
Yeah. I don't want to see those people coming to get food outside my house. Right?
Oh,
Yeah.
that kind of
So and so
goodness.
that was.
I was expecting you to say something different. I thought you were going to say,
no.
I don't want to put my donated money into your fancy location. That's what I thought you were going to say.
That's what I thought too.
Fair enough, but I think
that's why we wrote the press release about the building, the way it was really demonstrating that this money came from the sale of a building and the bequest. So.
How large is the board? How many people?
7 people.
7. Oh, it's relatively small. Yeah. So this is kind of maybe a strange question, but it really strikes me as interesting. If this work that you're describing was done by, say, the county of Ventura, would it be more or less efficient? By that, I mean, would the same dollars produce the same results, the same amount of service, or less? Is there a way to
Which program?
think about that? Well, all of them
Isn't
together.
that right? That's.
So, well, suppose the whole thing got turned over to Ventura County, just theoretically.
Well,
would they say, oh gosh, for us to run this,
Well, Tom-
we don't need all these people, we can run this much more, or opposite, we
don't think
need
that-
twice as many people.
I don't think this is the answer probably to your question or what you're asking us, but I feel confident in saying the county wouldn't do a good 50% of what we do, in terms of, we get a little too involved, if you will, right? And I say that from the perspective of what CAP does, and we collaborate a lot with the county of Ventura and other, city entities too, and they don't have capacity to sit with a client for 3 hours and work on paperwork, right? So I think
Don't
two
have
things.
capacity, and they don't have
They wouldn't do it
the
probably,
attitude
right?
of,
Yeah,
this
but-
is my job either.
So, maybe they
think.
would for the right amount, but I think they just operate so differently in that, and they have some really wonderful and knowledgeable and skilled staff, specifically when we talk about homeless services, who we learn a lot from, but I think that maybe it's not an issue of them being more efficient. I don't know that they could model what we do, because we do have this very
individualistic is what I'm
unique,
right. For me.
one-on-one, way in which we work with people. And that's probably, could be the top reason why we exist and why people want to support us potentially, right? Because we do that. But it's not common. It's definitely not something, and I say that I studied this, right? That was my intro to this org, was looking at what they did and this is not replicated in other areas. No. At least, I'm sure somewhere in the United States, yes, but it's very unique in that we can serve as a resource to an individual, an entire family, generations of a family, et cetera, because we know them.
I want to touch on that, and I do want to get to the unhoused population specifically. Do you have any sense of demographics that you serve? So I know there's a retiree population clearly, but then I guess I'm asking younger families, Hispanic families. Tell me who you're serving that you can. Maybe you don't have exact numbers, but
I do.
Okay.
I don't have them.
That's okay. Roughly.
Memorized. So I would say the community assistance program, right? So low income services, and probably the only program that would work with families, right? They're going to be, in terms of racial demographic, I would say 40% Hispanic Latino, and then 60% Caucasian.
Okay.
And then specifically within that, I'm not super certain in terms of a further breakdown. Obviously transportation, senior nutrition, that's all going to be folks who are over 60 or even over 65.
Let me pause. So with the families, are we talking about families that have kids that are going to OUSD elementary school, kindergarten? Okay. All right.
So that, I would say, based on, so we're about to go into a program where we'll have a lot of very new data about families. I would say that the majority at this point have kids who are probably in middle school.
Okay.
Because I feel when I was case managing, the highest group were probably that 8 or 9 or 10-year-old, right? And it's been a few years, so I think that's been a big jump, that those families would have kids probably in middle school at this point.
Okay.
I can pull data for you too.
No,
I know it's not helpful for this recording, if you will, or this, but
I was just generally curious. But then percentage-wise between, let's say, elderly people and younger families in the work that you guys do, could you break it down that way?
oh, probably
Say 65%.
I was going to say even lower, as families. I would say families are probably 20%.
Families are 20%, 80%.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you look at the entire org, right, and all programs.
Yeah. I was going to, that includes though, if you look at, we do serve a lot of people over the age of 60 in the food program. We do serve a lot of people over the age of 60 who are unsheltered clients.
Yes.
So that age demographic is across the board, and not just because we have these large programs specifically for elderly people.
We definitely, and I would say since, for several years at this point, CAP has had an ongoing conversation of how do we support families? How do we see them more? How do we get them in here more? And we just recently met with OUSD to talk to them a bit more to ensure that they know our services and feel confident referring families to us. One of our lead case managers who's been with the org for almost 10 years, she has children in OUSD, and so that's been really great because she interfaces with, her students' teachers, etc.
Well, we were just looking, OUSD is going to be in your shoes tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, cool. Oh, cool.
And, we were just looking at their data, and it looks like it's about, we'll confirm this tomorrow, but 45% of the students are receiving free or reduced cost lunches. So that's a demographic that we're all thinking about, wondering about.
Yeah.
So we do have this issue in our valley that we do want to contend with, and you guys are directly contending with it. No, that's really, really good. Is there anything you would like us to, is there anything that you want to do more with OUSD that you're not doing now? I know you're informing them.
Oh, I think that they have their homeless and foster student liaison, and so she will work really closely with our director of homeless services to ensure that unhoused families in Ojai Unified are aware of what we do, and we can support the families as they need or hope in terms of finding housing or seeking services, if you will. And so we're hopeful that some of those referrals will come around, but I think that it's nice, and part of what this meeting with Dr. Knox initially was, it was like, let's meet, right? Like, we are both really important stakeholders in serving families within the Ojai Valley, so let's make sure like we all know each other and can, refer back and forth. And we are hoping to do a release of information between our orgs so that, say, if Whitney, our director of homeless services, meets with a family and they say like, no, we haven't told the school that we're homeless, right? And she says like, you need to talk to them, right? She could ideally have them sign consent for her to talk to Ojai Unified about them and see ways in which we can both support them. That's what we're hoping.
If a family came to you, or if you were referred and a family they're living in their car.
Yep.
Then, if you don't mind, I'm going to use this as an anecdote. What happens then?
Sure. If they came to our office, they would likely meet with a case manager, and we would do something, it's called an intake into a program called HMIS, which is the Homeless Management Information System. Okay. That is a county-wide database where the entire Ventura County uses it to essentially make referrals and track client progress. So we would do an intake, we would see sort of what services they might be eligible for, make those referrals, a lot of which will come back to like they might be eligible for funding for an apartment, right, that they could move into. The challenge, however, is that there are no apartments, right? And so families, especially those who have children in school, will stay in a vehicle so that their children can continue to attend the same school that they're in, as they are looking or hoping to find other work.
So they could get food stamps, for example. They could get those kinds of things. But the apartment, they could get a voucher, but there's no apartments here.
So the voucher piece is a little more complicated. Okay. So in 2020 to 2021, the state made an effort in terms of like post-COVID or COVID time to get unhoused folks off the street by offering something called an emergency housing voucher. So what that was, which sounds great, it essentially fast-tracked you to getting a Section 8 voucher, which is a housing choice voucher. You have this, hypothetical voucher that has this restriction that you find a 1 or 2 bedroom, depending on the size of the family. It has to cost within this amount, right? So it's fair market value. So likely $2,300 to $2,500, depending on the size of the household.
And I will just want to go back that most of the places for rent are $3,000, $6,000, $7,000.
Right. So not only do you have to find this unit that's within fair market value, but you have to find a landlord who will accept a Section 8 voucher.
That's right.
So we had an...
Why would a landlord not accept?
Great question. Because I think historically, it has this bad rap that people who have a Section 8 voucher are like not great tenants. They're not going to pay their rent, or they're going to mess up the house, or that it's complicated because you have to do a little bit more paperwork. But the big pushback that we always have is, first of all, this is a family who likely is working with Help of Ojai, right? Like, so you're housing someone who will have support of our agency in whatever capacity, right? But also half of like that rent is getting paid by the government, right? So you will receive, that whatever, like 30% or 60%, 70%, whatever it is, the voucher difference. But so it has a really bad reputation.
So it's a connotation. It's a traditional feeling about
It is.
somebody who would take a Section 8.
Exactly.
It's all about
Right.
housing someone that has been in the poverty cycle.
Yes.
Welfare.
And
Yeah.
and further, like, it's not even will they accept a voucher, it's that they don't want to rent their place for $2,500. They want to rent it for $3,500 or however much over fair market value, right? So it's a challenge. So like, we had an unhoused family who had that emergency housing voucher, who had that voucher for 9 months. And you have to show Area Housing Authority or whoever, the voucher person is, depending on where you're at, you have to show them that you're looking for housing and that you're applying for housing. You only have X amount of times that you can renew it. And then if you don't find a place, you lose it. The voucher's gone, right? And so in our opinion, this voucher, for those who get it before even the emergency housing vouchers, right, there's a Section 8 wait list, you can be issued them. It's like the jackpot in a capacity that like you can have that voucher for the rest of your life, right? So like, especially for our older clients who are unhoused and they can't afford rent, when they are able to have something that allows them to be able to afford to rent their own place, et cetera, and they can have that however long in their life, it's amazing, right? But the challenge is finding a place in Ojai that will accept it, or the Ojai Valley even, right? Like, not even just city of Ojai.
Tell me if this is right. There's something like 20-something Section 8 places in the entire valley. Is that about right? 20 to 30?
I would say, so for Section 8 voucher holders, I would say that that's probably close to accurate.
Okay.
And we only know that based on like who of our clients, right? So there's likely people who are who have vouchers who maybe don't seek our services.
Okay.
Right? So there's always that. So that's, that was for a while the way in which we were supporting some unhoused folks who had those vouchers. But if you don't have a voucher, right, and you're seeking services, it's a lengthy process of ensuring that you're entered into the system, and then Whitney or Alicia, our case managers, present the client to the members of the HMIS community, who then prioritize them to determine who can get placed in most likely permanent supportive housing.
Okay.
So if an older person runs out of money and now has no place to live, can they get a voucher?
No, not that voucher, right?
Okay.
They might be able to get a voucher if they say put themselves on the Section 8 waiting list years ago, right? They're in some part of that process waiting,
Or
likely,
with Spring
right?
Oaks,
Or with
it's
Spring
like
Oaks.
a 3 to 5 year waiting list.
It's exact same, yes. So same thing, right? Like Area Housing Authority of Ventura County manages with Spring Oaks and Roth Apartments, and they are also, because of where we're located, that's the Section 8 voucher holder too.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So in Whispering Oaks, they look at your income and your rent is 30% of your income. Is that how that Whispering Oaks
Yes.
works? Okay.
But you also have to be of a certain income, right? Like I can't be, I still need to be, I think 30% of the AMI, right? Like you can't be middle income, if you will, and have a unit at Whispering Oaks.
You have to be low income.
Yes.
You have to be low income on.
And let me ask so let's say I want to lean into that, but there is now a family who says, I want my child to continue to go to OUSD in middle school. So we are in our car.
Yep.
Where literally do they park? Where literally do they use the bathroom? Take a shower?
Oh, Andy, these are really good questions.
Okay.
Showers. They maybe use the Ojai Valley Family Shelter showers,
Okay.
which is 2 days a week right now. They have a shower bus.
So they have the bus over by St. Andrews over here.
Yeah.
And then the Grange.
The Grange
Okay.
when the shelter season's open.
When it's open.
But as you can imagine, if you're a student, you're not able to go middle of the week to go take a shower in the morning, right?
So gym
Often,
class?
maybe, right? I don't know what students at Ojai Unified have access to in terms of that, but some families use the showers at Lake Casitas,
Okay.
which you pay a little bit to use. No, that's like a really important question.
Sometimes they can, if they have family
Yeah,
that they
that's what I was just
can't
gonna
live
say.
with, but they can go there and shower
Yes.
and do laundry.
Exactly.
So there's
So they're leaning
reaching
on
out.
family if
Yeah.
they have them.
Or friends.
Often we'll see a lot of families using their community here, whether it's like another family or some other advocate in their life who are able to sort of support them with that.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, and this is why, it's so important for schools to be aware of who is affected by this, like who their housing insecure population is or they're unhoused. It has a dramatic effect on your students' capacity to be in a classroom.
Of course.
Right? You can't, are they doing laundry? Do they have access to these very basic needs, right?
Or the internet. If
Right.
you're submitting your essay
No,
through
you
Google
can't. I
Docs
mean,
or whatever. Yeah, that kind of stuff.
it's really difficult, and it's a really hard time for families. And it's, we talk a lot about our vulnerable population, and we always frame that as families with minor children and adults over the age of 65.
Okay.
For us, that's priority. If it comes down to services where we do have to prioritize,
Yeah.
that's what we're looking at. But it's a really hard and it's a really sad time, and we've seen, in the last probably year and a half of the families who we've helped, many of them have left. They've had to leave the valley, either because maybe they had work there or it wasn't,
Or there's more housing in Ventura or Oxnard
Right.
than here, obviously.
Yeah.
Santa Paula.
Okay, so then their kids do have to uproot and
Right.
go to school. Okay.
And so it's a lot of choices in a way that really impact them. But the nice thing I'll say is that we serve to be their advocate through this process. And so if they whichever case manager they're working with, there's only two, so they likely at some point will work with both, right? They're wonderful, right? And they're really great people, and that's not to say we absolutely have to tell people things that they don't want to hear, right? And that's a really difficult thing to do. But at the end of the day, we will do whatever is the process with them. But the challenging part is that the process is really hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. And
Well, can I ask about now the people who are staying at the
Sure.
community garden? So are you guys involved with what's happening down there deeply?
in what sense?
Right.
Well, I know the
Yeah.
city's working on it. I know
Sure.
they hired somebody, Rick Rains. So are some of those people your clients?
Absolutely.
Okay, well,
Yes.
talk
So I
about
think
what's happening.
that's, and maybe I could paint the picture of how it started potentially.
Okay.
So we found, in 2018-ish, you guys might remember, most of the unhoused folks were hanging out in Libby Park.
Yeah.
And so there was this, effort to kind of get folks out of the park, and then essentially they all just moved over to the other side of the arcade, right?
Okay.
And then that sort of trickled out, and then COVID happened, and things got a little different.
When you mean the other side, you mean the back side of the arcade? Okay.
The little lawn that's
Yeah.
right there by Serendipity.
Yes. Okay.
And then we saw, a couple of people start living again at Libby Park. And when they were told they couldn't live there, they moved behind City Hall. There were a few folks already there that had probably been there for years, right? And these are folks we work with. And so that number slowly just started to rise.
Yeah.
These aren't, as far as I understand in working with our team, it's not a significant number of newly homeless people.
Right.
It's now folks have a place that they feel safer being in.
Yes.
Initially, right? That was part of why they went there.
Why is it safer? Why do they feel safer?
I think because they're near each other.
Yeah, numbers. I think.
And I think when you look at the population, which is majority over 65 and majority are women, the fact that they're by each other, this was then, right? Like initially when this was starting out, I think that there is like this piece of solidarity, right? But now it's exploded, right? And now
you're
it's
saying it's not
just that. I wouldn't say, I mean, I think it's the majority of people there. I mean, and if you look at our homeless count data too, the majority of unhoused people in the Ojai Valley are older. Now it's, a mix, if you will. It is some younger people, but these are not, at least to my knowledge, it's not droves of people coming from other cities to come move into that encampment.
Can you estimate the proportion of that population that is has mental health and drug addiction problems versus those that just ran out of money and haven't found a solution?
I would say that's a hard question because a couple of things. We obviously go by whatever a client will disclose, right? So I don't want to make assumptions or project numbers that are like, we think this, right?
Right.
I would say, though, that in general, what I've experienced in Ojai is that the unhoused population here are not unhoused because they have a disability, right? It's because they're unable to make it work here, right? And that's just my opinion, though. I mean, Megan, you know.
I also want to push back on, it's not that people have run out of money. It's that people have their Social Security coming in or have, whatever income stream, and that is not being raised enough to be able to afford living here. So they have money. It's just
They're not enough.
but not enough to be able to live here. And also at the age where, as Jane said earlier, you can't just hop out and go get another job. A lot of people are 65, 75, and that is, very difficult to find a job and be able to, maintain something for a long period of time with the aging process.
So there are people who say or think that in urban areas, the unhoused population is significantly mental health related. And you hear things like, you could find something for them and they wouldn't keep it. They would leave. They would just leave and go out on the street and wander around and get lost. And so in that case, the solution is quite different.
Well, I think this is a great opportunity for me to talk about the Housing First model.
Yes.
Okay. So we are a Housing First agency. Members of the Continuum of Care of Ventura County, it's the practice that we follow in terms of homeless services, which is a person who potentially is on the street with a disability or perhaps a dual diagnosis will be more successful at retaining housing if you get them housed and then address the issues. So it is not, you're absolutely right in that you can't just put someone in a home and expect them to thrive.
Yeah.
It's that you are providing them with ongoing intensive services to learn how to live that way again and ideally access the help for whatever their disability might be, right? And it is a more cost-effective model. It saves the state and the government way more money to follow a Housing First model than to kind of continuously be addressing the issues. And that's why, if you look at LA County and even parts of Ventura County, there's such a push to get people indoors, but that does not mean you shut the door and you walk away. You have agencies like us or other agencies in the area who are still continuing to practice intensive case management to ensure that people are supported. So I think that most cities or areas are following that. But of course, at the end of the day, you are going to decide, right? We are not going to force you to do anything. And that's, a really important thing, I think, for people to realize, because often, people will be like, I went to Help of Ojai and they didn't do anything for me, right? And that's a hard conversation to have, right? Because we can't just put you in housing, right? There are
We don't have housing.
like tons of things that have to happen before we can even start this process with you, right? It is a very complex process, and that's when a lot of people just say, nope, I'm out, right? And walk away, and that's their choice. And that's why we have had the exact same unhoused clients for more than 10 years, right? Some of them. And that's fine because we still support them in the ways that we can. And we have to understand that this isn't a linear process for everyone as much as for some of us it seems like it would be, right? But it is really complex. And I think that that's why it's difficult when you look at the encampment behind City Hall. No two people out there are the same. No two of them have had the same, if you want to like look at it in terms of case management, like they don't have the same income, they don't have the same disability, they're not the same age, like all of these things that we factor in when we're working with them. And so it's so important as service providers that we're dynamic in what we're doing and figuring out what works for other people.
Well, so are you part of the conversation that the city is having in trying to solve this problem?
So I will say this. So we, back in, I don't know, it's been probably a month now, I'm trying to recall when it was brought to council and they voted on releasing funding to hire someone. So during that time, I wrote to the mayor and I wrote to the city manager to ensure that they understood what work we historically have been doing with our unhoused population, right? Just because like we don't need to duplicate, but also please use us. Like these are our community, like we want to support folks. We have, good rapport, et cetera. I actually, Rick was a recommendation I made, like just knowing that, we know Rick from his days of the
We know Rick, he used to work at VST.
Oh, did he? So from his days of working at the family shelter, and he's a volunteer with us. So, we have a great relationship with Rick. So he did meet with Whitney last week. She's our director of homeless services. And this is going to be a multi-agency, effort.
That's how it looks to me.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it has to be. We know this. We know based on homeless services, this has to be. Yeah. So we, we'll work with them in the capacity that we can. It's, we don't like to see encampments growing because, we look at it, there being risks that come with that for the individual. But we also know how this all goes, right? And if we don't have housing, we don't have anywhere to put people, right, who are living on the street. And so it's a very big conversation. It's not, but it is, right? Because it involves a lot of money.
Are there other communities within, within California or within the range of Southern California where housing is available at much lower prices?
They're creating it.
Yeah, they're building it.
Right. It's crazy. They're remodeling, building, and being very creative about how to solve this. Other parts of
City of Camarillo.
Yeah, City of Camarillo.
City of Thousand Oaks.
What Ventura did.
City of Ventura.
Yeah.
Pretty much every city except for us has are doing a very Fillmore's building, Santa Paula, all of these other cities are looking really critically at.
There's a big project on Cañada Larga, we know, a housing, workforce housing thing that's being proposed.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, that's going to be for agricultural workers, that's primarily that. But so you were saying though, Camarillo has these projects that you're aware of, right?
Yes.
So everybody's doing it but Ojai.
That's kind of
but
what it
yes.
feels like.
That's what it feels like.
And everyone's doing it differently, and they're all partnering with different people, and we see that these things can be done. Like Fillmore's mini mansions, they have an incredible there.
What
And
does that mean, mini mansions? Like tiny
No,
houses?
it's so fun. Yeah,
it's an organization.
They're an organization.
Thank you.
Many mansions. So they built housing, and we actually, several of our clients went there.
Yep.
Because
And
they
they're
were able to
thriving.
get, housed.
Okay.
And and what I'll also add to what Megan's saying is Camarillo and Ventura and Thousand Oaks are repurposing existing structures into housing.
Yes.
So for them, they're revamping hotels,
I heard about the Ventura Hotel project.
which is huge. But they all, this is all, like the state is so eager and willing to help the cities or the orgs who want to do this.
Well, would you even go a step further and say they're going to leverage and in some sense force things to happen if the city keeps balking at building? That's what...
Oh, what I was talking about was in terms of getting funding
Oh, the
to do
funding
it.
part.
But I do think, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's so sad to say, we've been managing a homeless population of, between 30 to 50 every year, right? Individuals. And some folks are housed during that time, and then more folks become unhoused during that time, right? And it's this kind of ebb and flow, right? So these numbers behind City Hall aren't surprising to us necessarily. It's just now we have this very tangible homeless
visible
population.
So I heard you both saying that those people, this number of people have been there. That's not new, but now it's concentrated and visible. So
Behind City Hall.
And it's behind City Hall.
I mean, that's what's tough, and it was in Libby Park, right? But it was not so many folks.
Well, it's more hidden and
And now it's that.
But
And
I'm trying to get to the question you asked, which is what is the solution? And is part of the solution for Ojai that there needs to be more units available
Yes.
for people?
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't want to commit to saying it's build, right? Because I don't know that that's necessarily the answer always. I mean,
Okay.
what we were really pushing when we had the emergency housing vouchers was, can people be creative about their garage unit? Or do they have a room that they can rent? We are very pro renting rooms to people. That is a very ideal scenario, especially for an aging population,
Right.
so that people, they themselves aren't aging alone. But I think that, I had a conversation with a service provider, a couple weeks ago, and she said, if we built 20 tiny homes, we would essentially, for whatever snapshot in time, end homelessness in the city of Ojai.
Right.
Yes.
With 20?
Yeah,
20
there's
tiny
probably
homes.
20 unhoused people behind City Hall,
Yeah.
right? So, and that's definitely, that's absolutely simplifying it in a way that I know is not, I could come up with lots of reasons that wouldn't work or that's not exactly what that means. But we have, when you look at the state or the county, our numbers are so small compared to other areas, right? And so when you think, man, that's all it would take, right? Or several multi-bedroom, apartments or whatever, we could do it.
Yeah.
And that's what's just such a
And there's funding to do
Yes.
it from the
Yeah.
state.
Do you know the
So what
timeline?
stands in the
Okay.
way? Why aren't we doing that?
I don't know, Tom. That's a great question. No, because I think
It's
mean,
hard.
It's hard.
It's hard because you have to take on a lot of red tape.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's red tape, but I think at the end of the day, there are so many people who do it that it wouldn't be red tape for the people that you're actually asking, come and do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that it might feel like red tape to say city council, right? I don't know. Because to me, you're right. What is standing in the way? To me, it's why did it take there being an explosion of tents behind City Hall for us to finally take steps towards this, right? But at the end of the day, we're talking about it and it's happening. And I said this to our board a few weeks ago, this is the most I've ever heard the city of Ojai talking about unhoused people,
Right.
ever. In my 7 years of service provide, here. So we are moving and we are doing good things, but we have to really kind of think about, our time that it takes to do all of these things. How is that impacting the community who is living this?
Well, so you might not want to commit an answer to this, but so when you think of the Cabrillo Vistas project that's being proposed over here, from what you know about it, and of course the Planning Commission is looking at it today.
Tonight, yep.
What do you think about a project like that? for solving our problems. Not necessarily, I mean, unhoused people, but also people in need, right on the edge.
I mean, I think it's great.
Mhm.
Anything
yeah.
that will help people who are, on the edge, who are low income, very low income, people who don't have anything, like anything will be helpful. And I do believe that it's going to take all of these different projects to be able to even put a dent in it.
Yeah.
So is it 10 tiny homes, Cabrillo Economic? Is it, a different project in Oakview that's going to kind of solve this by working together and doing it? Because I don't think that there is a place, and who knows, maybe I'm hope I'm wrong, that we can just, not we, but the city and the people here can build 10, 20 tiny homes or 25
Right.
tiny homes. Like where is that going to be? So when we start to think about housing, it has to be, multi-pronged approach to it, because you're not going to put, a five-family,
Right.
5-person family into a tiny home. That's
Right.
not possible.
Right.
So we also have to look at, we want to house seniors, we want to house individuals, but we also have to be able to put families in homes and put, multi-generational families in homes and have these spaces.
And I think that on like the very simplistic, like we are pro that, right? Because it ideally creates a pathway to permanent housing for both our unhoused population and our just generally housing insecure clients.
Right.
I don't know how it's going to work, right? Like I don't know how Cabrillo is going to prioritize people on their wait list, and are we involved in terms of that process, or how does that work, right? If you were to say, like, yes, all 40 units will go specifically to residents of the Ojai Valley, et cetera, et cetera, et
That's being
cetera.
proposed.
We're like, yes, that would be wonderful,
proposed.
right? So there are pieces of it, but at the end of the day, like I think I have talked about this before, like to me, there being a 3-story building on Bryant Street is not worth the life of like a 70-year-old woman who's living behind City Hall in a tent.
You're saying we should not be stopping the 3-story building because we could solve this problem, so that fight is, it's a disingenuous fight, or it's a
I
fight
think
not
you
worth
just
that.
really, and perhaps that's like why we're leaders within this work, right? It's like that will always be, for me, the piece that I circle back to, right? It's like the family with an 8-year-old and their 10-year-old who are sleeping in a car every night because they couldn't afford the house that they were in, right? Like there's just these things that for us, it's always about the human and individual need. And
So just to be clear, that so I think you're saying it might not be desirable to have a 3-story
Right.
building, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
We ought to do it anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I know, I mean, I read Facebook every day. Like I see what everyone's talking about in terms of, the like, I just read a 65 comment one about that building, right? And how we
Just
don't
this
need
morning, that
it,
was a big, long thing.
and we don't need it here. And I mean,
Yeah.
people, that's like, you're entitled to that, and I get it. And I think,
Well, let me ask specifically about, because this is really good, because this is just such a perfect example. When people say, well, it's great that there's going to be a project like this, and then there's all these questions about, well, they're a nonprofit, but how are they benefiting, and whatever, all that kind of stuff. But then they'll say this affordable housing rate that is being proposed that the state sets out,
Yep.
okay, we all get that, is still too high.
right.
So then how would we address that for somebody who is on the edge that maybe can't even meet that?
Well, I think ideally, and especially with this one that they're building, and again, I don't know what their intake process will be, et cetera, but my understanding is that it's diverse in terms of X amount of units will be low,
Right.
X will be super, low. I think it goes back to Megan's point of like, it's not going to be one building that's going
Right.
to address this issue.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Well, and the whole, if you didn't see it, it's the October 4th Planning Commission meeting where they get the whole
Oh,
thing
yeah.
that
Yep.
if somebody has a certain number of these units, either low or extremely
Yeah.
low, they can build more to compensate. So it's, and I think the attorney who's presenting to them says this is weighted towards the developer, even
Yeah.
the for-profit developer, to build projects.
Yeah.
So I think what the state is saying is, we need to get more things built.
Yeah.
And they're looking at places like Ojai that have resisted.
Mm-hmm.
And they're essentially what they're saying is, we're gonna take away your ability to resist. That's where
Which
we are.
I think is literally what's happening in other cities within
Right.
the state.
That's what
So
is
we
happening.
shouldn't be completely surprised that this is
No,
happening,
no, many
but
aren't surprised.
right. And
So I just want to make the comment that,
Yeah.
that because it isn't perfect doesn't mean that it shouldn't be done.
I think that's,
Right.
that's a good point.
So in other words, the question is, does it help?
Yeah.
And does it help significantly?
I mean, if you were to say, will this change lives? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hands down.
100%.
Yeah.
But it also, we got to do cost benefit analysis of all of these things, and I understand
Well,
that.
I mean, there's a larger issue, it seems to me, about that particular project. If it were to bring 70 more OUSD students, if it were to do that, or some number, that's another benefit to the community.
Right.
That we will talk about tomorrow with those guys. But-
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not saying, yes, let's do it. I'm trying to understand it.
Yeah.
And there seems to be
I
a
mean,
lot of other
anything
benefits.
that brings diversity to the community, I think is just a wonderful thing because, you know, if we're bringing students and we're bringing people of different ages and we're bringing, you know, people of different income levels, all of that benefits the community no matter what because they're here and they're present and they're living their life here. And I really feel that when people get upset about how a building looks versus how are we housing someone, that humanity of that person is lost. And that is why I hope that as we discuss housing stays the focus because so much of the Facebook of the city council meetings, everything is not about the humanity of the person and really realizing that these people, everybody deserves to live with dignity. And that should be the center of the housing conversation, not what does this building look like, how is this going to negatively impact someone? Because if you look at any project, it's always going to have negative impact. So if that's all you focus on, you're never going to get anything done.
So are there things that you need for your agency to be as successful as you want it to be or to be more successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think always we would like to see more community members donating to our org. We would like to see, I mean, even if that's by way of foundation grants or some other sort of established group, if you will. I mean, we talk a lot, like not just us, but just orgs generally here of like, there's obviously people moving to Ojai, right? And like, what is the investment that they have in the community?
We
right.
talked a lot about that.
We have.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about that.
And that's, you know,
We've talked about trying to have a welcome wagon.
that'd be cool,
Yeah.
right?
That would be awesome.
Here are the orgs that you should donate
a
to. No, I'm
a
just
big
kidding.
menu
No, it
of
would be-
things that you can do because we would like you to be part of
No,
this
it would
community.
be, and that's so huge, right?
Yeah.
And so that would be nice, right? Like to have, but I always go back, like, and I think about this, like we're about to do our annual appeal, and I go back and read things or read about the org to kind of refresh my, passion about things. But we were founded because the community cared about this, and so that is what I hope forever that this organization exists, that we are majority, donor based from the community, because that's why we exist.
So
right?
you need an endowment.
Right. Yes.
You need a big pile of
No,
money.
so,
that
I
you
mean,
can
yes, of course.
Draw from a little bit at a time.
I asked Janie, and I said, if you had $5 million, what would you do right now?
Yeah.
And she said, I would build an apartment complex.
It's true. I think I said we would buy housing. I think I said but you're right though. No, we would.
No.
I mean, we didn't, Megan and I didn't want to be too radical when we came in as co-directors, and yet, these are the conversations we have all the time of.
But these are not proportions, in my estimation, that are unreachable.
No.
We have a lot of wealth in this
know.
community.
We do.
And we have people who this would not be noticeable at the end of the year on their financial statement.
You're absolutely
The kind of
right.
money we're not talking about $500 million to do something.
You're absolutely right. And I
yeah.
think what I often struggle with in a way is trying to also understand that like maybe we're not it, right? Like maybe we're not that org for someone, right? But then when I get really into it, because obviously my passion is housing, right? Like this is what I feel really strongly about. I can't help but reflect, like we have a wonderful humane society here, right? We have the Raptor Center. We have all of the, like we have an org that exists to protect land, but we don't have housing for people, right? Or we are the org who are somewhat managing that, right? And how it's so different, right? Like it's so different in terms of what you might decide you want to give your money to, and that being your, personal passion or things that you care about. But there's obviously a gap, like there's a gap in that service.
Do you mean people are a natural resource?
Well, you're saying it really, you say, well, there's a land conservancy. When Tom and I have talked about this welcome wagon to people, you would say, are you enjoying this?
Well,
okay, it's the land
right.
conservancy. Are you enjoying this? It's this. And you're bringing up this great point. It doesn't have that in the front of mind.
Do you want to address poverty while
Right.
you're here? Right. Like, no, but like things like that. Like it's definitely.
Or that poverty is an issue here also.
Yes.
That's an easy thing to overlook because it's not as visible as these mountains or.
Well, definitely if you're not driving through downtown or what, like you're not seeing
You're
it
not
so
looking
much.
at USD's numbers, right? For your
Right.
You're not. That's not obvious to you.
Or that we should take care of people as a natural resource. We take care of the environment, and we should, but we also ought to take care of people.
Absolutely right. It's definitely it's a balance, and I think that we're fortunate in that there are really wonderful nonprofits in the Valley. I mean, there are some really, people are doing some really great work, and we're lucky to be among them. And we know that people, some make choices like that are, they can't donate to everyone or they,
Right.
and we get that. And so we're grateful for those that we have donors who have been with us for decades. And that's something that I think we're really proud of.
Yes.
But I would say, we always want more money, right? Like there's so much that, we would be able to do, whether it be like something small or, creating new programs. We would love to be able to do that, but, we're at capacity, both as our personnel and then also just.
So I know people, friends who volunteer, and I think it's lovely that a retired executive will volunteer to drive one of your vehicles and take meals to people. It's lovely.
It is.
But it's also slightly ironic that this is a person who used to run a multi-billion-dollar company that has enormous reach and capability, and what we're getting from them is they're driving a car.
Yeah.
Now, I don't mean to say that in a cynical way.
No, I understand what you're saying.
You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
But I will also add that a lot of our volunteers are our top donors. There's definitely overlap there.
Yeah.
But no, I think you're absolutely right. And it's like, every time I read about X celebrity that now lives in Ojai that's doing whatever, I'm like, man, could they just send like a few.
that's the
You know,
welcome
like,
wagon.
that's when I'm
Every
like,
single
man,
nonprofit has this idea,
I know.
including ours.
I know. Well, I get it. And so it's, you can't help but, I think to a degree, process that and feel that way. But I just hope, it's so powerful to read people who are like, send them to Help of Ojai, or Help of Ojai can do that, or talk to Help, or talk to so-and-so. And I think that's so, I don't know, it's just reassuring in a lot of ways. And I will say that I think that, we made a really, like all of the work during Thomas Fire, which we supported folks who owned their homes, we supported folks who didn't. I mean, it was diverse in terms of that population socioeconomically, right? And then during COVID, all of our work with Great Plates, where we worked so closely with business owners in the city. And we've just really been able to intertwine who we are and our ethos and our org's mission, et cetera, with really different people here.
So, yeah, just on that, on the COVID part,
Yeah.
tell me if this is an overstatement, you helped keep businesses alive by the meals they were making in their
Absolutely.
restaurants
That
when they
is
weren't
correct.
open.
You stated it absolutely
Okay.
correctly.
Yeah.
That's how it appears to me.
So just to be clear, I think the work you're doing is really huge
Thank you.
and really wonderful, and it's a huge asset of the community in the sense, in the particular sense of providing this service and this service and this service, but also in the sense that it's a part of the community. Your institution is one that everybody knows
Yeah.
about. People talk about it. It's in the conversation, and so it means something different than
Yeah.
just it's on the other end of a county check that pops
Right.
out of a machine. It's the people working with each other, and it's really wonderful.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
It's nice to hear, right?
is.
It's so nice. Like, and it's nice. I mean, we are so busy. It's end of year and it's November and we have all of these programmings because holidays like huge for us in terms of helping families, and it's been just wildly busy, and things like this are so important for us because it does allow Megan and I to like step back and really talk about what we're doing and, you know, share it. But that's, you know, that's the most, you know, we can hope for, right? Like I don't know.
Oh, it's a lot.
It
It's
is.
really a lot.
Is it 4 o'clock now?
Yeah, I was thinking we're going to run.
That went by fast.
Yeah.
But
Is
with
there, what else do you need to say?
No, I just wanted to clarify, like, with Great Plates. So I think, you know, that was Help of Ojai managed funding from the state to do
Yes,
that.
understood.
Yes.
And we were unique in that we were the only city that contracted with multiple restaurants.
Yes.
So we were very clear from the beginning of that like that was how we wanted to do it because we wanted to support as many different businesses.
You mean versus one?
So like, yes,
Or two.
because like
Yes.
some of the other cities have like one catering company
I
do
see.
everything.
Okay, okay.
And so for us, that was really important.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like, I mean, definitely the feedback we got was like, we would not be open.
I know. I have friends that
Yeah,
own
like,
restaurants
yes.
who said that.
Yeah, we would not have been
And
open
that's
if.
also how our co-directorship started.
Yes.
So Jade
Okay.
and I
Yeah.
headed that project together. We, you know, when the when the announcement came
Yes.
out, you know, Terry called us into her office and,
And-
like, we're gonna do this.
And the announcement was the governor talking about it very loosely in like a announcement, a COVID announcement that then turned into, this is what we're doing. Before county had even said, here
Right.
are all of the things. We were calling restaurants being like, listen,
Okay.
yeah.
this is coming. So that's how that started. And we worked really well together on that project.
Okay.
And so then once that was seen and we moved through that, because we thought it was going to be 6 weeks and then it was actually 16 months of a
Yes.
project.
Yes,
So just being able to have that longevity. And the other COVID program was getting vaccinations for people.
Yeah.
So we worked really closely with the seniors and the Valley, especially people who couldn't drive when their age group opened up. So we were transporting people down to Ventura and Oxnard to get vaccines. And then
One at a time.
Yes.
One at a time because you
Sure,
couldn't
right.
put several people in a van together.
Yeah. And then once we had the vaccine site up here at the hospital, or at Nordoff with the hospital, we worked with the agriculture
Ag workers and restaurant workers,
yeah,
right?
to get people vaccinated. So those were our two big programs there.
And I will say, like, yes, the co-director model I think is different. I actually, before working for Help, my direct managers were co-directors
Okay.
as well. So I had that experience with it. But I think whether Megan agrees or not, I think it's been really beneficial and really good for the org. And I think
Good.
that you sort of bring in two people who potentially have different ways of thinking to tackle similar issues.
Right.
I like it.
And it's of the best interest in some ways.
I agree.
Thank you for your time
Yeah,
today.
thanks you guys.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
much.
Thank you for all the stuff you're doing and for coming over and talking.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.